Hi everyone, welcome to Type Talks. Today we have all TJ types, the ESTJ, ISTJ, ENTJ, and INTJ. And so Amy, would you like to tell us a bit about you?
Hi, my name is Amy. I am married with 4 kids. We live in Phoenix, Arizona area, and I got into type about 6 years ago and gobbled up everything I could find online, and I've been doing panels with Joyce since, just about the beginning, I think, actually.
Yeah. All the Type Talk loyal subscribers can see you throughout the entire love of the show, so that's amazing. Mm-hmm. And so, Samuel?
Hi everyone, I'm Samuel. I'm an ISTJ, of course. I'm Type 1 Wing 9. I'm from Brazil.
Great. Brazil represent. And Kat?
I'm Kat. I live in Philadelphia, where I am a property investor. I have 2 kids. I am a certified profiler, but I've kind of stepped away from MBTI lately. Not entirely, but it has not been a focus at all. So it's going to be kind of fun and interesting to get back into a conversation around type.
All right. We're here to help defrost your type engine and help you get more into the type world.
It's the extroverted thinking. It does need defrosting every once in a while. You got to dust off that folder and open it back up, right? Yeah, I'm Michael. I've also I think we've all been here since at least close to the beginning, but this is a new group here. So looking forward to talking to everybody, having a good, productive, efficient conversation with my new friends here.
Yeah, this TJ squad is deadly but efficient. I'm kidding. Not deadly. No one here is a killer, but killer good efficiency. So, hi everyone. My name is Joyce, and I'm a certified master MBTi practitioner, and I facilitate the instrument in organizations. I also help people with figuring out their type on that discovery process, and I also coach people. All right. So some of the commonalities that I think TJs share is efficiency, effectiveness, and getting the job done, and this ability to structure things and systematize things in the most fluid and smooth way. It's almost like streamlining is a talent of TE. But yeah, I'll kick it off to everyone. What are your thoughts on TE?
I would agree with that. I mean, I think we love universalizing things as much as possible, making them available to as many people as conveniently makes it work for. I mean, we're not going to go to extreme lengths to make it necessarily available to everybody. We all have our points of this is not worth the return anymore, but we like maximizing it for the most reasonable number of users as possible to a project. And we do enjoy streamlining. We enjoy organizing things, I think, to a degree, getting it all set up. We also like to be able to get things to run independently of us. Like, it doesn't have to rely on us to get it going. We prefer a process that other people can also run without us. We also like to tinker with our processes after a while. If we think they're not up to par, you'll often find us revamping them and tweaking pieces of them to make them work better. I think the other part is we come to very fast conclusions. We tend to when a problem is presented to us, particularly for the ETJ types, I know I would rather make a decision first and then reflect later. I know it's backwards for the introverts, but I'd rather come to a conclusion on the quicker side of the scale and start implementing a plan and then readjust my plan after we start using it, than wait for really sitting down and thinking through a plan and then starting it. It just feels very like we need to get the work done now. Can't wait till later to start working on it. We need to at least make some forward progress on it right now. And then I think also TE relies to a degree on not that we can't have our own individualized opinions on things. We do have our own individualized opinions, but we do tend to focus on group feedback or the feedback of what is actually happening in front of us, the results we see in the physical world of what's happening. And so we use that information while we're making our decisions. And if the decision we're coming to is in conflict with that, we need to have almost an extra sense of, no, this is really important, why we're not doing it this way, because it's not our normal process to avoid that information. We would have to have an extra justification for, hey, I'm looking at the process and I'm making an automatic pancake flipper and it didn't flip the pancakes. Well, no, I've now got to have a real good reason why I designed it and it doesn't look exactly like what I'm thinking it does, or something like that. So,
yeah, it's noticing inefficiencies or redundancies or things that are not working in the system, and then revamping the TE and making it better from there.
I see that in terms of discussions, there's a tendency to a fast-paced velocity, because it's necessary to keep looking at the problem as it is. Because at least for me, I tend to feel that the more that I think by myself, I have more tendencies to make mistakes. So the more that I share information with others and see their perspectives, I can get better results and correct some mistakes that I made on the process of understanding the issues.
I agree with all of that so far. I think the point that, Amy, you were making about coming to conclusions quickly, but being willing to change those conclusions, but sort of feeling, I don't feel like I have an anchor unless there's some decision or some conclusion that I'm anchoring it to. But at the same time, I'm with evidence, I'm more than happy to change that. I feel like a lot of times I sound more decisive than I am, and I will tell that to people sometimes, especially if something is, if I'm trying to get on top of something that's very complicated and it's just sentences become shorter and more imperative, and I have to just sort of, okay, let's, but I feel like I need that anchor in order to move ahead with something. And there's also something that Samuel just said that was really good, but I lost it. It'll come back to me.
Yeah, so there's this closure component to TE, like it wants something there because it gives it a sense of closure so it can act. Now that I have the stuff needed to make a decision, I at least can make a decision if I need to make a decision.
I just remembered what it was. Sorry. Samuel's point about the velocity, or not the velocity, the sharing something, and that sort of keeping things moving forward, but in a kind of collaboration. I think especially extroverted intuitive types, I think are helpful with that too, because is there something I'm not seeing here? And we're not introverted thinkers. So working that independently a lot of the time, it's sort of you take one step off the right path and then you just keep walking in that direction. So I do like to, even if it's projects that I'm independently driving, I do need to take them out to people and just sort of check my progress and check my perception too.
Yeah, and when you're talking about that, we also have a tendency to put our emotional feeling about something is how the process is working and the results of the process. That is our emotional state at the moment. If it's not working, our emotional state is not good. I mean, to put it very simply. But that also means we can put our emotional state about this matter or other matters on the back burner while we're currently working on this problem, because fixing the problem fixes our emotional state. So we have a tendency to, a lot of other people, just look like we're ignoring emotions. And we're not trying to. It's just fixing the problem fixes the emotions to us in a very simple way. So one of the other places we often need feedback from is if you are feeling dominant, we need that feedback of we're crossing your feeling boundaries, because it's not our first thing to check on. We're busy about the process, we're busy about this, and it doesn't always strike us to think about that. And it's not that we don't care, about it. It's just not our first impulse to care about it. That comes usually in, we've made the first version and we're realizing it has problems. And that's when feelers tend to step up and say, the reason why is because you totally forgot, you shouldn't schedule this on somebody's birthday, and you're like, oh yeah, that would, nobody wants that scheduled on their birthday, or whatever the reasoning is. And it's usually good reasoning, it's not necessarily valid reason. It's just not reasoning we look for first. So if you come across one of us and we're doing this kind of stuff, please do speak up, because sometimes it's just a matter of we're skipping over those components, and we don't mean to. It's just we're not wired that way, to think of that first. Or like when Samuel says, the conversation gets, we're talking about the people, and Michael said the conversation gets shorter, and our sentences get shorter as we're giving more instructions because this is complicated and we're trying to fix it right now. We often tend to forget niceties and other things like that. And we're not trying to be mean. We were trying to solve your problem because you had a problem and you asked us to fix it. So we are fixing it because we think fixing the problem fixes your emotions. And we don't realize that in fixing the problem, we're actually making your emotions worse because of the way we're talking. And we really don't mean to do that. We're not trying to exacerbate your problem in fixing the problem either. It's just, that's not the way we do things automatically. So it is admittedly a learned skill for us to do that. And some of us have gotten to the point where we're pretty good, but I always appreciate somebody who's willing to, stop me now or later and say, you forgot this important fact.
Definitely agree with you, Amy. One thing I've been thinking about a lot lately is that I think folks that don't use TE tend to conflate so people think, so I'm interested in hearing people's perspectives, and people tend to conflate perspectives with emotions and feelings when they don't maybe understand quite how TE works, or they don't use it themselves. And I think that's really important, because I think we, in general, I mean, maybe this isn't true for all TJ types, but particularly for me, like, I'm very interested in hearing other people's perspectives, all the way from the sort of bottom rung of like what's getting, whoever's working for me on any particular project, kind of the lowest level of what's getting done all the way up. That doesn't mean that I necessarily am going, I might be interested in hearing about their feelings about it too. I probably won't use their feelings to make an objective decision about how we're going to move forward, but it may impact elements of the execution that are flexible. So we could still achieve the same goal and, maintain some flexibility to address those concerns or needs in some way. But I have been thinking a lot lately about this sort of difference between perspectives and feelings. And I think that's important to consider. Does that make sense?
It's like the difference between you're making the product and customer feedback. When we're making the product, we really don't care about the emotions. We're making the product. But do we care about customer feedback if the product is ticking somebody off? Yeah, that does matter to us to a degree. But the problem is, you might think that because you're the employee, you get to give customer feedback. And we're like, dude, no, you're the employee in this situation. We do not care about your customer feedback because you are not the customer right here. I'm the customer, the other person's the customer, you're not the customer, and we're not trying to be mean about it, but we do prioritize things differently. And so sometimes there are other people who are like, maybe they're the people they would consider the customers for whatever we're doing is a much bigger pool than we would consider the people who are the customers and whose feedback is important on how this is going, particularly when it comes to their feelings. So, because I would say that TE people are extremely loyal to those who have affected our lives and those who are, the customers in a business sense. We do want to keep our employees happy enough that they're not going to leave unless they're a lousy employee, in which case, but there are people for whom we are very concerned about not just their perspectives, but also their feelings. But a lot of times that pool is not as wide as other people's pool is either. Like, I will gladly offend most of the world for those close to me, and there are a lot of other people who would have a very hard time with that concept, but that's just the way I am.
In terms of the problem, there's a critical issue is when the time when you address the emotional problem, because when the problem in the real world or the function is not solved, the emotional implications of that situations are more serious. So if you solve the problem first, later after you have a more safer and probably wiser manner to attach those problems. So focus on the thing first can help a lot of issues to be prevented.
Amy, you brought up
Usually, that's the case. Yeah, maybe it may not be the place for other people, but if we don't solve the problem first, our emotions get worse, as Samuel said, and so we have to do it in that order, because if we do things emotionally before we solve the problem, our emotions tend to be a much more all over the place. We tend to give worse responses. We tend to be meaner. We tend to be more insulting. We tend to be short-tempered. All that kind of, in general, negative, bad feelings you think of, that's what's going to tend to come out if we don't solve the problem first.
Yeah. And so, Amy, you also mentioned the word prioritization. So something TE is good at is prioritizing time, resources, or being able to manage time and resources in an effective way.
Yeah, and I think it's a good point maybe to draw a distinction between the extroverts and the introverts here, because we're Samuel and I are obviously leading with introverted perceiving functions. So I almost want to say that the thinking and the feeling is more closely tied together, but it's a little different than that with me, I think. Where I would draw the distinction is where, Amy, where you talk about being becoming short-tempered and the emotional state kind of deteriorates. I've worked with a lot of ETJ types, and always worked quite well with ESTJs and ENTJs. I have seen this, of course. I think for me, and I don't know if Samuel, you agree, I wouldn't say my emotional state deteriorates as much as I would say it just sort of freezes. I become colder. So I don't get more short-tempered and sharp. I just get much more monotone, like in this, I find myself speaking in this like firm monotone and staring at people sometimes, but it's not like a short-tempered kind of reaction, but it's just as people seem just as taken aback by the colder kind of response as by the more maybe aggressive kind of response to that.
To that, the feeling is that the emotion just closes off. Like, my main goal is to solve the problem, so I will only utilize anger if it is necessary. If there's someone who will not hear me, okay, I'll be angry. But it's not necessary. Just switch it off and do what is necessary. Because it's not that, at least in my case, probably Michael is similar, that I'm afraid of my emotions, that it's not the proper time to face them. So I need to be more calm and be more in a state of mind which I can be more neutral and not trying to see the implications of the emotions. So when I need to do something fast, I cannot process. If I attach that, it'll be just a mess. So better be focused. And when I have the time, I would be relaxed and see what I did badly or what was good to be done, and evaluate in more conscious manner.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen ETJs be cold as well at times. It just can flip back and forth, just depends on how they do it. But I agree on the side of I think for us, we know to do a good job with emotion takes time for us. It's not something we can do quickly. It's kind of a slow process. And so that's very frustrating to do that when you feel like you're in the middle of a minor crisis of, I need to do this thing now. Like, I don't have time to slow down right now. I am in the middle of doing something and I don't have time to be slow. I needed an answer 5 seconds ago, and you're asking me to do a task, which is going to take me 30 seconds or longer to do well. And I don't have time for that right now. And so it is, frustrating when people ask me to do, emotional work when I'm in the middle of trying to get a job done, and that's one of those cases of like, would you please just hand me like the formula of whatever fixes the emotion at the moment, because I ain't got time to do this. Like, you probably know, the answer to fixing this emotional state. Particularly FE users are actually really good at this, like, because they've dealt with these situations before and they know how to make them turn back to pleasant. And I'm like, would you please just hand me the FE answer at the moment? Because I just don't have time to come up with it on my own. Thank you very much. You gave me the answer. I will use it here in 5 seconds. Now my problem's gone. Now I can get back to the rest of everything I need to do at the moment. I mean, we can come up with really detailed and nuanced emotional responses, but that just takes a little time for us, and it takes downtime, and it takes feeling like there isn't a different crisis going on at the moment, or a different set of problems, and they don't have to be big crises. They could just be our to-do list. We just have to feel like that's not in front of us in order to do that emotional work on a good level.
Exactly. And I think what I'm hearing from everybody is we don't necessarily have a problem putting our emotions on ice. Like, that's definitely something that we can do. I love what you said, which is, I'll be angry if it's like the thing that needs to happen right now, like using it as a tool, but it's still, but that's the thing about the processing is like, however long it takes, it's still in there kind of roiling. So it's something that can't be ignored for too long without consequences. The only other thing I would add from my perspective is that it's also a question of time, because if I have the I'll make a pretty quick judgment about whether I have the amount of time I need to work on something and to complete it. So if something comes in and there's, say there's a deadline, it's 2 weeks forward, perfect. It's perfectly enough time. I sort of, and this goes to intuition too, but it's just sort of the gears start running, and it's just like things start processing for me, and there's not a lot of turbulence there, because I know there's enough time to work on something. If something comes to me and I make that judgment that I don't have enough time, this is needed now ASAP, and it's that's when I can get sharper, lose my temper more quickly. It's sort of, those kinds of, the question of like, am I running up against the clock? In which case I really need to kick the TE into high gear, I feel like, and that's when everything else just gets shoved into the background. So, yeah.
And I think it's funny because I think when we hit that mode, there is a, I don't want to say we love that mode, but part of us does. Like, when we are like behind the 8 ball on a decision, it's like, bring it on. Like, I am ready for it. Like, in the Empress New Groove, like, Cusco and the other guy, they get tied to the log falls down into the river, and all of a sudden the guy goes, goes, let me guess. Waterfall? Yep. Sharp rocks at the bottom? Most likely. Bring it on. And they go, booyah, as they're going over the waterfall. And I'm like, sometimes I feel like that's my attitude when, I'm behind the 8 ball on something. I'm like, you know what? May not be fun. Bring it on. I've got the energy. My adrenaline's pumping. We're going to get this done, and I'm going to do a great job. Even though I'm behind at the moment, like, we're going to, it may not, best of show, but I'm going to finish better than most y'all at the moment, even though I started behind y'all. So bring it on.
Is that a little bit of a difference?
Exhilarating.
Is that a little bit of a difference between like the extroverted, right? I'm saying not like that. Does that seem scary as hell to you? Like that scenario?
For us introverts?
Yeah.
I think yeah, I understand what you're saying. And definitely, I mean, I think the good thing about it is it can throw you into a flow state where it's just you're hyper focused on something, and there's a pleasure in that, just sort of being there. I'm less enthusiastic about it than you sounded though when you were describing it. So yeah.
Oh, it can be absolutely exhausting. I don't want to do it too often, but there is something about it. Like if it hasn't happened for a while and the opportunity presents itself, it's like, oh yeah, my time to shine. Like we are going to be doing this. We're going to be doing a great job of this. Watch and learn, folks, because it's a flow state of a different kind. It's not necessarily, that's a very good description of it sometimes, which I think confuses other people when they're like, you're wanting to do, you're wanting to go into this hyper focus, active motion, and thing. And, it sometimes it is a physical, flow of, I'm cooking in the kitchen and I'm getting the last part of dinner together. And I got, several, meat, sides, veggies, whatever going on. And I'm trying to get it all to the table. And all of a sudden, like, it's like, okay, kids, come down for dinner. You're doing plates and you're doing forks and you're, and the orders start flying everywhere as we're trying to get everything to the table at the same time. So everything's actually hot, and we get this, it's a very jazz flow state. Like, there are some days I worked for McDonald's for years where I almost missed the lunch rush. Yes, it was crazy and chaotic. Like, yes, we were always under pressure to go faster, faster, faster. But, you work with a good team and you hit this flow of, no, I'm getting the orders out on time. My customers are happy. We are stressed to the max. And, can I do it for the whole 8-hour shift? No. Like, I can only do it for 2 to 3 hours before I am done, and we need to slow down the pace. So we need to okay, because by that point, you're out of cups and you're out of everything else you need. But it is an exhilaration to do that to some degree, especially if sometimes you can get that same flow state from doing something that is a predictable routine too. Like, we all knew how to work the store, we all knew how to make the orders, get them out, there was, yes, there was high intensity at the moment, but it didn't have to necessarily be a crisis, but you could still choose that same flow state of, I am keeping track of everything. I'm getting everything going. It's all working smoothly to the same spot. And so I do think we enjoy it on that side of things too.
I think that's like I used to get into that flow when I waited tables too. By the way, Amy, there would be a whole shift that I just would disappear in about 4 seconds. But I think that's what I love the most about TE is it can be so laser focused on what needs to get done. And it's so good at just cutting through those Gordian knots and just being this is what we have to do. We have to do this now. And just cutting out all the fat, and it just does it without, friends that I have that don't use TE are just how can you look at this problem that we're up against and just know and I'm not saying I'm perfect. Oh, I've always got the perfect solution or whatever. But TE is just really good at focusing on what really needs to happen, ultimately, and just anything that's extraneous, it takes it right out of the equation. And that's beautiful. I like it.
It has a talent for cutting through the noise.
Well, from my end, I would say that because their dominant functions, TE is easier for them to get a flow state in those sort of situations, even though they're problematic. But probably for the introverts, the organization that we're doing is to prevent those sort of moments. So the flow state is primarily in terms of perception, in terms of organization, visualizing what can be done, what's supposed to be done. But that's still possible, I believe, when you see that's no other solution than just focusing on your task and you do it, you let your T take control. So it finally, you feel that joy too, but it's probably just rarer for us.
I totally agree with that. Yeah. And it's because the thing is, when I think that the TE dominant types are very, very good at just cutting straight through that noise. And for me, what it feels like is the noise just becomes more ambient noise, where there are other things on the list and I can just feel them sort of slipping out of my control. So I think I just feel when in that state, when something really needs to be focused on, then yes, then that needs to be attacked first. But it never totally drifts like the other things that are being pushed down the list and other deadlines that are getting closer and other things that just need to be set aside that are just they're always haunting me a little bit when I'm in that state. That state of hyper focus that Amy and Kat just sounded really enthusiastic about when they were describing.
We're not haunted when we're in that state. Not the way that you are.
No, what's haunting is I, was reaching for, straws to put in the bag and I grabbed the wrong number and now I have to reach the second time. That's haunting when I'm in the hyperflow state. That's, my kids at, home, am I worrying about them at all? No, like I've completely forgotten that I have a husband and kids, when I'm in that flow state. Like they do not exist. What exists is, did I grab, everything I needed the first time through so I don't have to duplicate my actions? Is there any way to like have grabbed, napkins and straws and the condiments? How much can I grab in one handful so that I don't have to reach my hand over there a second time? Those are literally the things running through my brain at that moment of hyperflow. But I have found that after hyperflow, there is a reevaluation of how everything went and, trying to pick stuff up. And I have found that in general, people who are perceiver dominants, like our introverts over here, they are really good about, they're really good at streamlining by preparing in advance something. I'm good at streamlining in the moment. Like, toss me the variables and I will cut straight through them. But if this is something where any kind of planning is useful ahead of time, I often find that perceiving dominants usually are faster the first time through than I am, especially someone who's more of a planning type, like IJs are. They can do those a little faster. Now, I might sometimes I move faster than they do and I finish faster, but that's because I'm copying their decision tree and I just moved my hand faster than they did. Not because my thinking process actually necessarily went faster or made better choices. So I really like having those people around for, especially if this is going to be a repeat chaotic activity. Those people are nice because they tend to, they look at everything that I went through and they're like, you could have made it easier. And I'm like, great. What was that? Please show me. Thank you very much. And yeah.
Yeah. And so that brings up an interesting topic, planning and everyone's planning process here. How do you go about making plans? Do you make plans?
To-do list, calendar, yeah, and constantly keeping, those things up to like Kat, like you were describing this morning, like, yes, Mondays, sit down. Okay, what does the week look like? Does anything need to be pushed forward or backward? And when that's in order, I feel really good. When everything is out of the email box and in its place on this, timeline of things that need to happen, and I can commit a certain amount of time to each of these things, and I'll track and measure those things. But keeping that in order is that's when I get that feeling that like it's that flow state feeling, is when all of those things are organized, which is most of the time, yeah, pretty good at keeping organized. But when things are just those times when things are just flying at me, then we fall into that other, what we've been talking about for the last few minutes. And I'm an extroverted sensation inferior type. So when I'm in that place where those the lists are out of order, the calendar's out of order, there's too much going on, a lot of things are flying at me, the phone goes off, everything goes off. It's like I need to shut out as much extraneous kind of noise and things. Like I'm just picturing, at a, being in a restaurant, it's the busy time, and it's just someone's dropping plates over here and my phone's going off and something's going on at home and everything, and it's just like those are the places that, yeah. You really, you gotta plow through those situations, but it's not the most comfortable place to be in.
Yeah, those interruptions, they break your concentration, so it doesn't feel nice.
Yeah, I like to plan ahead. If it's a routine activity, if it's not a routine activity, I have a hard time planning ahead. Like I can't plan ahead for something very well that I've never experienced. And that's because I have SI as my perceiving function, which is a great, for me, it's like a great catalog of all the memories of everything that's I've ever experienced or I've watched other people experience. So if I'm truly being thrown into a new situation, planning doesn't help me because I have a very hard time forecasting something that is nowhere close to anything I've experienced. That's very difficult for me. So at that point, it's just better not to plan at all and just rely on my TE and then my NE to help me out in that situation. I am very fortunate. I am married to an INFP, so I have had a lot more practice with FI and NE, and because of that, so so I can use those in a pinch pretty well. They're not my go-tos, but but I can do that. But otherwise, I do like to plan ahead and as much as possible, and to some degree. And then, but honestly, there's planning ahead, and then there's like reviewing afterwards. And I would much rather review afterwards, having done it once, review it, and while I'm reviewing it, I can make new plans for how it's going to go the next time. But honestly, planning works much better after the first trial run than it works beforehand ever. So it's just better to give it a try and then revamp from there than trying to, plan something completely from the ground up. Or, there are shortcuts to that. Like demonstrations are a shortcut for me. If I can, watch a YouTube instructional video on how to cook something, or, read a book, or, if I'm just helping at the party, that'll give me the first time trial run I need to be able to do it on my own. There's a reason why they say in education that SJs are one of the types that when you're learning something and it's a multi-step process, they are willing to demonstrate the part of the process they understand, even if they don't understand the full process yet. Because I don't have to understand the rest of it, but if I do have this part, I can show you that I understood this part because you demonstrated this part of the equation. And I got this part, so I can demonstrate this part back to you, even if it's like a multi-step algebraic equation and I don't know how to do the next part. I can at least show you I know how to do this part. But that's because you've shown, all these steps to me. I may not have all of them yet, but I've got these ones done, and I can do this one because you showed it to me. SI does learn really well by watching other people by demonstration. We might have, I think I'm going to posit a theory here. I think we tend to learn better visually and audially than some other types do. Kinesthetically is not necessarily usually something I find an SJ types to be their first choice in learning how to do something. We do learn to do things using our body. Obviously we all learned how to write, and stuff like that. That takes practice, but we have a tendency to, I think in general, to learn very well by watching and listening to other people and copying that way as being our first priority, as opposed to I have to do it myself first. I don't think that tends to be something you'll find as often in SJ. That's something that we do, but I don't think I think there are other types that's much more common for than SJs.
Mm-hmm. Samuel,
Yeah. I don't know in terms of visually, because I believe that for other types, they can be more visual, but with like geometrical figures, and other types of like make a combination of dots and lines, other things to visualize their plans and how to understand the problems. But probably for SI, maybe that's a quality. The visualization comes with other elements, like the texture of the things, like deepness. So in terms of visualizing, there are a lot of components that get together than just the image, probably. That helps. So when you're watching the thing happening in front of you, can get those elements more easier than just hearing about them. Like, for example, for myself, I never liked when I had to read a book and there's like face descriptions. For me, that's not enough. I know that that's just a suggestion of the character, but I like to visualize it, and just words are not enough to see it properly. So probably that's the difference.
I agree with you on the whole, I cannot visualize a face off a paragraph description very well. Which is why it really annoys me when they change the cover book art on, they're reprinting a book and they change the cover art, drives me batty. Or like, I've got the cover art picture and now you turn it into an actual movie and my brain just can't compute because this actor doesn't look like the cover art on the book, because I've literally used the cover art and manipulated it in my brain to play out the whole book series. And now you just, or it works in my favor sometimes because I can, if I really don't have a good description because the cover art wasn't there, I can watch a movie easily. And now when I go to reread the book, I'll literally use that actor's, faces and movements to play out the book as I reread it now. Like it, so when I say a visual learner, I just mean somebody, who can watch and learn as opposed to, to understand it, that I don't have to always do it myself to understand what you're doing. I can just watch you do it and then I know what to do.
Got it. And Kat?
I don't know what we're talking about anymore. Are we still talking about planning? Are we talking about learning styles now? We're talking about learning styles. Joyce is just like, just talk about anything. It doesn't matter.
You interpreted my nods correctly. I think we went on an NE tangent just now, but it was nice. It was great.
I don't know. I guess I'll return to the planning discussion because I was thinking about that a little bit just now. But one thing I think maybe sets me apart as an extrovert versus like maybe the approach that Michael would take. I think I'm a little bit more. So I want to get. I'm always planning. Like I'm constantly planning in my head. Like when I was typed and I was asked the flow question, like, what do you like to do? I'm like, I just like to plan. I'm sitting there planning. I'm thinking about the future. I'm thinking about what's going to happen next. I'm thinking about next week, next month, next year. So when someone asks me, like, how do I plan? I don't even know how to answer that question. I bet Michael probably feels a little bit the same. It's just like, I don't know. It's just I'm always planning, constantly planning. But I think especially with what I'm doing now work-wise, I don't really know I can't really plan my days down I can't really plan most of my days depending on what's going on because we have to react very quickly in our market. So a lot of times in the morning, they'll be like, hey, we got to go and look at this house like before noon, like make it happen. We're just going. It's like, okay, well, I had something else planned. It's like, too bad that's what we're doing now. So my approach to planning generally is more, and what makes me feel comfortable and sort of in control is like, I need the framework. I need the outline, I need kind of like the bullet points. I need just like the loose structure. And then I have like the freedom to play around with what's inside. I don't know if you feel the same, Amy, if that's like a TE Dom kind of thing where it's like.
It's very helpful to have at least I need the basic instructions of what we're here to accomplish today at the moment. Like, is the goal the meal on the table? Is the goal, get this done? There have to be some basic outlines that is very helpful to me. It is possible to get to the point of you gave me too many instructions. Like I do hit that point of that was way too detailed. I did not want, like that many. And to me that because I know I'm good at making decisions. If you give me too many instructions as for how it's supposed to go, then I just want to sit back and say, hey, no, you just tell me how to do the whole thing from start to finish and I'll just copy you. At that point, you're not asking me to make any decisions. You just want me to follow the instructions. Okay, I can do that. Like that's fine. I don't have a problem with that if you know what you're talking about. But, so there does come a point where it's like, okay, do you want me to work independently or you just want me to do copy paste here? But yeah, I do find that as long as I've got some basics, I can feel pretty comfortable making all the decisions for something, as long as I got just a few basics of what's going on.
I like the point that, Kat, that you made about, I'm just always planning. I'm always planning. And I think this is something that might be misunderstood by other types because it's like, if you describe that process, that there's certain systems set up and there's a cost benefit analysis to everything. It sounds very cold, rational, and it's like this robotic kind of process. But what people need to understand is that is just always just happening. It's not like not much conscious effort is going into that, where, it's like, if I'm going to need a certain amount of information for like tax season next year. There's all of these little, obnoxious bureaucratic things for, the DMV or the taxes, any sort of government thing. So what I don't want is to get to, next March and say, oh no, where are all of the things that I need, and run around and gather all of the things. It's like, if you have something in place, like I have a system in place, and every time I see something that just pings, like I'm going to need this at this time next year, then it just 5 seconds, it goes over there. It's out of my mind. I don't have to think about it. It's not one of those haunting things that just pops into the back of my head that like, oh no, I don't know where this or that is. Everything is in its place. And those systems kind of run themselves. So it's not, I think sometimes the perception is that, especially for the probably for the introverted types, that we're robots, if we sort of, set up all of these things, everything is in order all the time, and all of these kinds of things. I don't spend much time thinking about these things because they just work, So it's like, yeah, there's planning always going on, but it's not like I have a sheet with columns all the time that I'm just sitting down like, we need to plan now. It's like that's in place. And then it comes to the Monday morning thing where you sit down, everything's in place. Okay, give me half an hour. Let me get this whole week in order. And then that's done. And I don't have any of those things in the back of my mind just nagging at me, distracting me from whatever's happening, which could be just hanging out with friends. If I'm just with friends, I don't want to have all this stuff in the back of my head that's just like, you need to do this tomorrow. You need to do that. It's like, okay, I know if I need to be thinking about any of those things right now. And if not, then they're pushed off to the point where they need to be addressed.
Yeah. And so Kat and Michael mentioned this emphasis on planning, and it just comes naturally. It's just so fluid. It just happens. And so that's a good way to spot if you're typed correctly as these two types as well, because there are common mistypes. Let's say, for example, the ESTPs oftentimes mistype as ENTJ because they have a very just do it attitude as well, except ENTJs enjoy planning and ESTPs don't really plan, and they just rely on their reaction time of their SE. So that's like a huge difference between the TJs and types that mistype as TJs. It's the planning aspect, because TJs will plan for the important parts, or what they consider the important parts that they already know they'll come across. So it's these obstacles they already foresee, and they already have a vague or a comprehensive plan on how to deal with these obstacles coming up ahead. So I don't know, it's a very indicative of TJs to me, like that specific element, but especially NTJs. But maybe it's just a TJ thing in general too.
Yeah, like I was shopping last night. I had to run to the grocery store, and it hit me as I was doing it that I'm like, oh yeah, I'm pretty sure my veggie count in my freezer is getting low. I should probably pick up some, another bag or two of veggies for this week, and then I'm, looking at them, evaluating the cost price and going, okay, do I want to like stock up right now? Or is this I'm just going to get a few for the moment and, stock up later at another time. But it wasn't something that was worrying, it was just something that, oh, I'm at the grocery store as I'm walking towards, this, I'm going to walk down the freezer in particular. I'm going to check this as I'm walking. And if it's not there, I'm going to just keep walking and, be out the door.
Maybe I see a difference in terms of the planning of the INTJs and the ESTJs. Maybe it could be that for them, the perception of planning is more related to like concepts, and adaptation is more related to what they actually do. And for us is on the contrary. So at least for me, I tend to prepare more what are the things that will actually need and be actually do. Because what can happen is it's something I take for granted. Like there's a situation, some things actually tend to happen there. I do not think about it, regardless of what happens, probably I'll need those things, and those things need to be in order and prepared. So I'll prepare those things and face whatever comes at me. Maybe there's a difference.
I could see that. So Samuel, what you're saying is like the NTJs plan for like how the situation is going to unfold, like all the variables. Whereas for you plan for what you can control. So basically, that regardless of what happens in the scenario, you're planning for your part. Because the NE, the extroverted intuition in STJs is like anything could happen. Like there's like what ifs could be plethoric. So I'm not really foreseeing. I'm just more planning, but it's not necessarily simulating the entire scenario. It's just simulating the specific part you play.
I tend to put more weight on how I'll do things and what I'll do instead of what will necessarily happen. Like, and if I know that I'll do well what I can do, so I'll do my best. Not necessarily how things will play out. I don't tend to like to act like at the moment because I feel that I miss something, some aspects that can be important, some details can be mismanaged, even though maybe not important, but I feel that I need to do them well. So
I think one of the other things I'm hearing is, as a EJ, I feel responsible not just for how I act in the moment, but those I can command at the moment. Like, it's not enough for me to feel like I did my part well. I have to feel like I made everybody else that was with me or I'm responsible for do well as well. And if I don't, it's very frustrating. Where I've noticed that IJs have less, they don't feel as much pressure as I do for making everybody else conform to the plan. You know, or at least they would wish everybody else would, but they don't feel as personally responsible if the other people don't get with the program. Where I feel way more responsible if other people don't get with the program. Like that is like actually extremely painful to me. And I tend to break out big hammers when other people don't get with the program because I need you here. So I'm going to find whatever hammer works to get you here because I feel responsible for the fact that we all have to arrive together, you know, and I'm going to pull and push you across it. Like, we have a girl who's in college that has been, we call her our campus kid. You know, she comes over, does laundry, you know, her family's out of state, stuff like that. So, you know, we keep tabs on her and stuff. And she graduates this spring and she has had academic problems in the past. And so I have been on top of her, like, you know, hey, you know, you were doing your projects, you're getting them turned in. And because I keep pressing, I'm like, you will graduate this year. You know, like I will pull you kicking and screaming across the graduation line, but you are graduating because, you know, we are very politely getting rid of you this year because you need to graduate because, you know, this is, you know, like failure is not an option. I know it's not me. I'm not even the one graduating, but failure is still not an option. So we're, you know, like, and I do think sometimes EJs feel that sense much more keenly than IJs do about other people.
Yeah, I'll say that it's not an implication that Amy said, but not to mention that I'll still think about what is the impact of my actions on the system and on the group. Like, I'll just try to act as the best cog as possible. Just that I don't need to force point. I'll still be occupied and concerned about the success of the group. But my most important part is to do my job well, even though I know I can go a little bit beyond that. But that's a good point that Amy made.
Yeah, that point that Amy said about EJs and stewardship is true. So sometimes the way you can tell apart the difference between an EJ and an IJ is how big is your scope of what you feel responsible to take care of. And so, Kat, do you have any thoughts on this?
I was just thinking a lot about what Samuel said about kind of like what I heard him saying was sort of that structure is sort of helps. It almost sounds like it helps with efficiency because it helps your mind kind of know what to focus on, if that makes sense. Do you feel that? Is it like an efficiency thing where it's like, you know, you want to know where to focus your energies and am I making sense?
I don't know if I understood well your question, but probably in terms of how I plan things, I tend to be organized in terms of things that I would do so that the efficiency comes from within myself. Like what I'll do is completely coherent with itself, sort of like. So when I'm at the group, like my part will be running properly, and that will help the group as a whole, but not necessarily will leak into the other people a lot.
So, and there's like a freedom almost in like not having to think about those other things. Like,
my priority is to keep things to myself. I will only do like try to help other people. Like, this is how things should be going. If it is extremely necessary, like, it's not something I want to do. That can happen, but it's just not likely.
And so another trait of TJs that just came into my mind was how they notice who is good at what. And so they're good at knowing competency levels of the people around them. So you're good at this task and you're probably good at that task. So they have this ability to talent scout or even know who is right for certain roles.
Really, really good at that. The ETJs are really good at that. Yeah. I think the best working relationships I've ever had are with ETJs when we're in complete alignment on a plan, and it's just everything works so fluidly because there are certain talents that each type has, and especially I love having an ETJ that I can lean on when someone's not getting with the program, just to be like, hey, so and so is not with the program right now, and letting. Right, Amy? Like, hey, Amy,
you like our hammers. You want us to use our hammers instead of using your own hammers. Well, I read you loud and clear.
I can't get over the fact that Kat has like the subway map like shooting out of her brain. It looks like right now the way this camera is set up. That's extroverted thinking. This is how.
I mean, there's a reason why EJs are. A manager is a good description of us. If you take it back to the idea of a manager is somebody who has a group of people that they organize. You know, if you take it back to that idea of somebody who's trying to facilitate things by organizing a group of people to their best ability, EJs are really, really hard to beat when it comes to that. Because that ability to notice different people's skills, and we're also actually pretty good at predicting whether or not you have the skill. Like, you know, you may not have shown us the skill yet, but we can probably predict whether or not you have it. Like, I don't find it too often where somebody can suddenly show up with a skill out of nowhere where you know, I didn't know that you had that skill. And then, but the other way you can tell us is if we suddenly find out you have that skill, we can effortlessly rewrite the plans to use that skill. It takes no thought process time at all whatsoever to look at somebody's brand new skill and go, oh, I know how to use that. And like, you know, and, you know, revamp the whole, you know, clock or, you know, all the cogs or, you know, all that stuff. It's and, you know, there's also nothing more fun than, you know, it's truly enjoyable to look at something and say, hey, you know, when I worked for McDonald's, I was also a manager. One of the things we had to do is, you know, assign people different positions for different doing things. And so, you know, being able to evaluate the different crew member skills of going, okay, you know, I may be better at every task than everybody on my crew, but that's not the most effective. You know, I've still got to pick and choose what's, you know, the best, what other people are best at so that I can get everybody in the most uniform flow to make it all work. And ETJs are particularly good at figuring those kind of skills out. I would definitely agree. And I think that's also why we like working with other ETJs. I mean, that is great fun to work with somebody else that has a very similar mentality to us. But we also like working with other types because we'll freely admit there are things we're not as good at, and we like having the other types available that are actually good at, better at something than we are. To, you know, it's like, oh, good, I don't have to do that because you're actually better than me. Great, you do that.
I didn't really realize like how good TE is at like identifying resources and skills. Like anytime I meet anyone or encounter anyone, I'm just tagging completely unconsciously in my brain, like what they do, who they know, where they work, like, and when something like bizarre comes up, like some bizarre situation, I literally most of the time I'm like, oh, hey, we could call that guy that I met that one time that like, works down at whatever. He does this like random thing, or he probably knows somebody who does. And we just like make this kind of like web of connections in our like unconscious. We had this like thing that came up recently in my kids' school, and they're like, oh, it'd be really cute, like to figure out, like, I thought it was cute. They're like, we're going to put together like this little database for like, what like all the parents are like, kind of like what their skills are. Like, oh, John does landscaping, and so does like, he's got a moving business. And I was like, oh, that's so cute. Like, and it occurred to me in the moment, like when someone brought it up, like, I already know, like, just call, like, just ask me, like, I'll tell you who to call. Like, you don't need to make a spreadsheet for that. That's really adorable. But I don't mean like, I'm not trying to toot my own horn, but I'm just saying, like, as a TE Dom, like, it sounds like you're saying the same, Amy. It's just something that we kind of, we don't even think about it. It's just like,
yeah. It's like small talk has a purpose, like for us, because literally we're sitting there going, okay, so what's all the data points that we're going to use for the future? Or as the other thing you learn is, what are the data points that are going to keep me from sticking my foot in my mouth? Because now I know your parents are divorced, and I'm definitely going to be careful about talking anything like that. Okay. Whatever the case may be, like, so like, because after enough embarrassing stories of events, I falsely assume something. I now very carefully collect small talk data points so that I, am ready to use people, but also to avoid certain things, because I'm not doing that. I'm not making that mistake again.
That's an advantage for the extroverts, is that they are more likely to spend more time with people. So they get to know more about people than us. Though there's a secondary advantage, just not the function.
I was thinking about
very
that.
True. Yeah.
Sorry. I was just thinking this morning about how like the sort of downfall, I guess, of like an introverted TJ type can be that they don't spend enough time with other people. And so they're sort of susceptible to making certain assumptions. Whereas I think the TE Doms here, we're a little bit more susceptible to sort of almost, I don't want to use the word arrogance, but kind of just like assuming that we know, because like we already went out and talked to everybody. So, like we know what's going on here. So pros and cons.
How many people do you all talk to in a week outside of the pandemic?
I mean, for me, that's saying like outside of the last 2 years, right? Like it's changed quite a lot. It's not like things have gotten back to what they had been. When I lived in DC, which was up till I moved back up to Western New York early 2019, so it's been a couple of years. I would see a lot of people. I had a lot of friends in DC, and then I got back here, was traveling a lot for a year, finally got to settle back in Rochester here. And then the pandemic started. So it met much, not enough people. There's a small handful of people I talk to on the phone regularly, weekly, but it's, I would talk to dozens of people a week in DC. I'd be out a lot. I think that's the thing about introverted. I mean, I can speak for maybe more INTJs here, although Samuel, I don't know if you agree with this. I feel like as you get older, you get a lot better at these things that you just weren't good at when you were younger. So there's a lot of things that are stereotypically like we're not good. Like, stereotypically ITJs maybe aren't good at getting out of the house, which is true as for me as a younger person. And then that sort of, you settle into things that you were uncomfortable with as a younger person, and things tend to balance out. I know a lot of older INTJs who look more like ESFPs. I know a lot of older ISTJs who look more like ENFPs. You settle into those lower functions. But something like just lockdowns and stuff, I mean, you can get thrown back into a comfort zone that feels comfortable. I think there are a lot of I'd say I know quite a few INTJs who are like, yeah, I'm very comfortable with this. Great. This is great at the beginning of the whole thing. And then, certain, you're not exercising certain muscles, so a couple of years go by and it's just like, I don't want to I'm happy here again, in my place, which is not the best place to be, and it's more of a chore to get out. It's more of a chore to interact, you know? So yeah, it's the comfort zone, and it's one that you want to get out of and not be thrown back into, you know?
Yeah, I've always been extremely sociable. I am people driven by nature, which confuses a lot of people when you're getting projects done and you turn around afterwards and you go, oh yeah, I'm doing it for people. And they're looking at you like, are you sure you're not doing it for projects? No, really, I wasn't doing it for projects. I'm just doing the project because of the people. But no, I talk to lots of people. I am almost always the conversation initiator. Like, hardly never does somebody else start a conversation with me. I will start it first. The number of people I interact with really hasn't changed since the pandemic, mostly because I live in Arizona and we've pretty much ignored most of the rules. So by now, I still do all the same social functions I ever did before. Still talk to all those people. I mean, the only thing that's changed now is, like, you know, telling my kids to keep their hands to themselves so we don't touch everything in the grocery store and everywhere else, you know, like, and, you know, staying home longer when we're sick so that we don't get other people sick. But, you know, outside of, you know, stuff like that, the rest of it hasn't changed all that much for me. No, I am highly, highly sociable. And that's about the only thing that would confuse somebody into thinking I was a feeler. But that's about it. But then they get all confused when I don't have the rest of the feeler qualities. And then they're like, what is wrong with you?
Personally, outside of necessity, like having to go out to speak to people who are working or studying with me, less than 10 people. Most are my family and very close friends. Like they're not a bunch of people, but I 100% agree with Michael that with time we tend to learn to be more extroverted. That I believe that's very important. When I went to the university, is something that I consciously made a choice to not be quiet all the time. Actually, I had a ISFJ friend. When he was talking about his past and his stories, he always talked about how his friends made things, but he just watched. He didn't do anything. Like, man, I don't want to have that life. You need to do some things and some things and be like someone. You cannot just stay relaxed inside yourself and do not let that be reflected in your life. So the more that you understand that the other people and the world in general is something that you need to address and it requires you to be there and is a good thing to be there, I believe that's a good learning for all the introverts.
It is true, yeah. There is that inclination to not initiate, but you realize after too much of that, it's like, oh no, I'm going to waste it. Like, I'm not living a part of my life. I'm depriving myself of experiences or people. And then out of that fear of deprivation, it's like, all right, I'm going to step outside of my comfort zone. Cool. And Kat?
I think ENTJs just as a whole, we're not necessarily, I was very convinced I was an introvert until I was about 36. And I actually struggled a lot when I was younger with like certain types of like social anxiety and things like that. So I don't know if I would have come across always as like the most extroverted person. I think I've embraced it more as I'm getting older. I think I tend to not, I am a pretty social person, but I think I tend to socialize around specific interests. So whether that be, I'm not necessarily the person who's like, yeah, let's just go to this like random party where we don't know anybody just to meet new people. Like, that's not really something that would like juice me. But I do want to go to places where there's existing community that I've interacted with, where I have the opportunity to get to know people better that I'm interested in getting to know better. I don't want to go and sit and small talk with people. Like, I have no interest in that. In fact, I find that I went to a party on Saturday night where I knew like 75% of the people there, but I didn't know everyone. And it was like a gathering that was, folks were basically, we were gathering for a birthday, but most of the folks play an instrument and they just get together and jam. And I don't play. So I'm like off in the corner, like having to chat with like new people that are like, you know, the girlfriends of the other folks there or whatever. And if I found somebody really cool who I think was probably an ENFP, and we just like hit it off and we spent the whole evening together. But the first like half an hour I was there, I was just like, oh God, like we got to find stuff to talk about. Like what, like, oh God. So I'm not that person. Like I'm not the person that's jumping into the party scene, but you know, I've got like my D&D group. I've got like social groups that I meet with regularly around specific interests. And like if there's any chance to network, I know that's such a dumb like ENTJ stereotype. We don't even really think about it. It's not like we're like, I'm going to go and like network, but we just unconsciously, we're just always like, what does this person do? Do they do anything that's relevant to my business? Do they do, or is this somebody's like, do they have resources or knowledge that I could pull on or that I could offer them? So that's something I'm always thinking about. And then I think there's like another aspect to it where it's like, I might not always be like social in like the human space, but I'm really active in like certain groups on like Facebook or other social media where it's like other people that are doing work around like contracting or real estate or whatever else. And that's like been an area that I've spent a lot of time communicating with people like just all over the country or other places too. So I think we can be kind of social in another aspect, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, like, because I'm a stay-at-home mom currently, stuff like that, I tend to, in a sense, I network all the other adults around me that have kids. It's like, those are the facts I need to know because that's relevant to my main business at the moment, which happens to be raising children, I have moved a couple times in my adult life and I've always been very involved in church. So, whenever I've moved, it's usually changing states. So I don't know hardly anybody at my new church, but, I'm always there to like, okay, this is my new network. So I'm going to get involved. I'm going to start talking to people and what's your backstory and what's your backstory and, who is actually related here, but we wouldn't have known because married names change and, all this other information stuff that, I go for it. And I'm actually sociable enough to the point where I've actually had to learn to sit back and shut up. Has been the learned skill for me. I grew up in a very large family. I am the oldest of 9 kids. And my parents are also in families of 7 and 8, respectively. So we all tend to talk super fast and cut each other off. And it was so terribly bad that before I went to college, I had a couple of friends politely stop me and say, you will have no friends if you don't learn to shut up and let other people talk and quit cutting them off. And so I worked very hard in college to learn to take turns. I even have to watch that here in doing panels. I tend to find I'm usually one of the main talkers on any panel I show up with Joyce. Part of that's just because I always have an opinion, but learning to take turns with other people was definitely a learned skill, but it's also something that I've noticed I only had to learn because I was so extremely bad that people actually bothered to tell me. So now it's getting to the point in my life where other people do it and they were never as bad as I was, but because they weren't as bad, they never got told to stop. And I have to look at them and go, okay, do you realize that you need to learn these other skills? So it's kind of a blessing for me that actually at least it was bad enough I got told to stop. So.
It is a symptom of possibly being an extrovert. So not all extroverts dominate conversations, but if someone does dominate a conversation, it's more likely an extrovert. Because introverts, all introverted functions deal with the domain within your internal world. You're very conscious of when you are imposing yourself on the external world. So it's pretty easy for introverts to know when they're over talking, just because it's so unnatural for them sometimes to get out of their inner head to go out. So there's a huge awareness of when they do put themselves into the outer world. But yeah, Kat brings up a really good point where she talks about she thought she was an introvert for a very, very long time. And that is the journey of many ENTJs. They typically think that they're an introvert because they may not care about peopling, socializing as much because your form of extroversion is getting stuff done and moving things along. And that's not typically described as extroversion when it is a form of it.
Yeah, like what Kat said, like remembering me that probably when you are using an extroverted function, you don't feel that's yourself that's happening there. It's the situation that calls you there, so it just naturally goes there. So probably when extroverts see themselves, they do not see their dominant function because that's related to the situation that they face. So they look at what's theirs, so their second function, like where Kat would be an I, and for Amy, probably a psi. So I have an ESFJ friend that she needs to talk a lot. So she sees herself in certain situations that are specifically related to her type as ESFJ, but she believes that her problems are common to all humanity because is related to the extroverted world, but it just happens because of her approach to it. It's because it's extroverted, she believes it's not hers. So she does not hear herself like making her problems. So probably when you're using extroverted function, you do not see yourself like actually using it, the impact of that.
Because extroverted functions are very reflexive, they just automatically engage. Like with FE, you don't know that you're doing FE, you just do the FE and you're like, I'm subconsciously doing the FE. Because it's so automatic. Because extroverted functions, they just see the environment and then they almost move to work around their environment, but it's not like a conscious process, so it's hard to catch yourself doing it, maybe.
Yeah, I've noticed one of the other signs of TE is I get very frustrated when other people aren't using TE, and it seems like a simple TE fix. Like with my children, it's like, well, I taught you how to do this, easy way. Why are you forgetting? Why are you, let's get with the program. Which I think is very symptomatic of a TE user. But the other thing I've kind of coined for myself is I'm what I consider a double extrovert. I'm sociable and cognitively extroverted. So it's very just abundantly obvious that I'm an extrovert, where there are other people who, maybe not as nearly as sociable as I am, but they're extroverted like Kat is. Or sometimes you have introverts who are very sociable, and so they're quite talkative, but they're sociably extroverted, but cognitively introverted. And so I think and then you have the very quiet types who are both, not sociable and cognitively introverted. And, so there is kind of a spectrum there that, because, it's very, I find it very often when I'm talking to people who do not understand type at all, or sometimes even people who only know dichotomies, they very much confuse sociability for cognitive extroversion functions. And I'm always explaining to them there's a big difference between the two of them. And then there, of course, there are always other exceptions for why somebody might be something like that. Because my siblings who are introverted still can talk a mile a minute and everything else because that's their self-defense if they ever want our parents' attention or anybody else's in the family, So
that's a good point, Amy. The doubly looking extroverted versus the single one. So I think the people who are they may be socially introverted but cognitively extroverted are the type of people who would call themselves the ambiverts. And then everyone in the tech community is like, oh no. Because they are colloquially, through the definition that people typically use outside of Jungian typology, they are within the middle realm because they don't see themselves as socially extroverted. But that's not what Jungian typology is talking about. It's talking about cognitive extroversion or introversion. And so that requires a little bit of time for people to sort out. So good point, Amy. There are environmental factors like the family you grew up in that can affect that. Mm-hmm. And so my last question for everyone is, what are some of the differences and similarities you see between these types? How would you be able to tell apart these types if you met a TJ, but you don't know which TJ they are?
Samuel, do you track your energy levels very closely? Because that's usually one that I've seen pretty consistently as far as
all the time.
Yeah. I think that's one that's consistent enough, actually, that if someone smiles and nods like they know what you're talking about when you say that, that's it's not a dead giveaway, but it's a clue.
Well, I would say that usually that's a trade-off in terms of the planning again, like trade-off between organization and control. I tend to feel that for ETJs, they usually allow themselves to be less organized because they are more able to act, so they have more control in the situation. And the IJs, they will try to organize more so they don't need to be in control more time. So that just flow by itself.
Yeah. And Michael, do you track your body energy well, or are you saying that's more of a Samuel thing?
No, I'm saying, every INTJ I've met, including myself, always has a running energy bar that is being tracked by some incredibly sophisticated set of metrics. So I was just checking with Samuel on whether that carries over. I mean, introversion, that would speak to that too. It seems like, there's so much involved in there's so much of a spontaneous kind of focus on tracking and metrics and these kinds of things. So I think the dominant extroverted types would be primarily focused on just whatever's in front of you, whatever's like on the table. And the introverts are more likely to more often apply that to, things like energy reserves, which I track in subjective and objective ways.
We find energy. Do you find energy? Like, we just find it. Like, I don't know where, but we find it. My partner's an INTJ, and like, I probably have 3,000 times more capacity to pull energy out of myself than they do.
This is a big way. I think this is really just because what I'm hearing, I want to make sure that this is what you're saying, is that for you, doing gives you energy in a way. Like, it almost like it keeps things more, not necessarily, I mean, things can be there could be a lot going on and that'll drain anybody, but it's incredibly draining for me, just like doing. And I really do need to step back and refill the tank. Take a nap, I would say. How many naps? That's one thing you could ask. How many naps do you take, and why do you take them?
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think also EJs tend to we tend to operate at high energy capacity a lot, but we also tend to when it's downtime, flow out of that faster. Like, we don't necessarily stay so amped up if the reason isn't called for. Like, shifting between energy levels, I can shift between those pretty fast. Like, I can be going really, really hard and fast, and then it's time for bed, and it doesn't take me necessarily always too long to unwind and then be out. I also think there's I think sometimes TJs in general track time better than other types, but I think STJs track it a little bit more minutely. Sometimes I feel that than the NTJs do, mostly because it has to do with the fact that STJs' plans are a little bit more concrete and a little bit more something happening in the physical world. And so, because it's actually happening in the physical world, we can literally time how long it's going to take for that action to happen. I make bagel sandwiches for my husband and my kids before they go to school in the morning, every morning, and I know exactly how long it's pretty much it's going to take me to get everything out, get everything made in the microwave, out of the microwave, all this stuff. It's kind of down to a science of time, and that's one of those differences, because I've noticed intuitives don't necessarily track time on the micro scale as well as this STJ does.
It's the SI too.
SI is very good at tracking time on a micro scale. I think NI is very good at tracking long-term projections when you're talking multi-year, seeing far-reaching trends, seeing far-reaching consequences and stuff like that. I think NI works better at that, but I don't, but I've not noticed that NI users, they're very good at tracking what the results will be. They're not always precise in guessing when that result will happen, though. Like, they know all the dominoes leading up to it. They're just not always sure exactly when those dominoes are going to fall. Sometimes is the vibe I pick up from them, and so they're just waiting, because as they're noticing the dominoes falling, now they do track very well how fast they're falling and how slow it's coming, they do track that stuff, but it's not the same sense of literally there's a clock ringing in my head and I can count the 60 seconds.
I think that's a really interesting point. I mean, I will find myself saying things like, within the next 5 years, something's going to happen, and just putting it like a more vague timeline like that. I mean, I know when the next thing that I need to do is, and I know exactly when that starts. I'm not going to be late for that, but I'm not tracking every increment of time up till then. I just know what I need to get done before that, and then that time comes, and then I'm on to that thing. So I think that. Never thought about that before, but I think that makes sense.
I mean, I literally in high school, I could time, getting ready down to this is how long it took me to shower. This is how long it took me to get dressed. This is how long it took me to, do my hair, eat breakfast, like down to minutes of, increments in time. And that wasn't hard, to do. Everything gets exponentially harder when you're dealing with other people. But,
Well, actually, in a side memory, I was watching a basically dad YouTube channel that's MT support. That's when INTJ said something that really clicked an eye to me. He said that he sees that for him, the ESTJ planning is not organized. It's organized at the beginning. How it unfolds in time from him is just a mess. So you look the difference on where's the organization for the nurse perspective, his and INTJ, and for the ESTJs in this perspective. It's a completely different measure of organization and how things are linked.
That makes a lot of sense. How is everyone's attention to detail?
You have to define detail first, because that's usually where the problem comes. Because when they ask the question in bad typing tests, are you a big picture thinker? You'll get sensors who answer yes. But if you actually defined what constitutes a big picture, sensors quickly realize, oh no, I am not that kind of big picture thinker.
What definition of big picture does not resonate with you?
To be honest, the whole, forecasting global trends on a, decades long plan and stuff like that, that's big picture far beyond what I can do. I am concerned with maybe what my plans would be in 5 years, with my smaller group plans. There's from my INFP, a sense of dreaming and inspiration of things that is just so big. And to me, it's vague, although I can sense he can see it clearly, but I just can't. I can't see it clearly. It seems very big. It's very vague. And I've come to realize that I've long ago given up the description of big picture planner. In fact, my husband usually thinks my big picture plans, which usually are something along the lines of, if something happened to him, what would I do? Would I, my current plan is, if something happened to him, I'd probably move next to my sister, because that would be my next support base, and he can, it's just a very different sense of what that would be and how many details are a part of it, because usually my big picture plans also come with some kind of concrete facts to it, as opposed to just a philosophy. I've noticed intuitives, their big picture plans often are mostly centered around almost more of a philosophy than an action sometimes. As far as details, when I say I'm detail oriented, I mean like for Christmas, I wanted some new clothes, and I wanted long waisted shirts that, where it was almost tunic length. I didn't want t-shirts that were shorter. I wanted them very long. I wanted certain colors. I wanted certain kinds of fit. And I was very fortunate that my sister-in-law came along, and she is a great shopper because I'm not. She found me stuff that fit my specific criteria for what was going on. There are details of tracking time. There are details of how many, when I gave the illustration earlier, if I was at the grocery store and I picked up more for some veggies because I thought my count in my freezer was low, that's it. Actual physical details are usually what I'm tracking a lot of the time.
For me, I'll say that's a bit complicated to call things details, because for me, some details just destroy cohesion. For example, if I speak Portuguese as my mother tongue, I could just say random words in Portuguese through the whole conversation. That would not be a huge problem. That would destroy the cohesion of what I'm saying to you guys. So for me, even though it's not relevant, there's no meaning or no reason to not keep the cohesion. So it's kind of hard or rare to see this is a detail. For example, when I'm studying engineering, there are some values for certain characteristics of materials. For me, those are details. But if I have to work with them, they'll not be details anymore. So that's a bit complicated to define what's in relationship to details in general.
Yeah, so if someone's making a typing assessment, they might want to consider everyone has a different definition for the word that they see in front of them. And so when we picture a teacup, we don't picture the same one in our mind. And so it's important to kind of add the defining, how we see it, how we define it.
Also, I'd say I do enjoy detail work. As far as getting to a chance to refine something down to the small details, I really enjoy doing that. And small practical details, of what it's doing. My philosophies, I tend to keep them pretty simple. As far as they go, it works, it doesn't work, I like it, I don't like it. I tend to co-opt other people's philosophies a lot, especially if somebody else can word them nicely. I'd be like, yeah, and that's it. That one over there.
I had a conversation this morning about helping set up a system with a group, and there was a conversation about naming conventions and how important really is this, and do we really have to go back through all of this and do so and so? And it's a lot of times this is how the conversation goes. This is how this conversation went. Was I know that the order of things makes sense to you right now, and I know that these seem like small details, but in 5 years, someone else is going to have to come back and make sense of this, and it only becomes more and more of a problem if we don't get on top of these details from the beginning and moving forward. Because if we also don't get on top of it immediately, then we're not going to be in the habit of doing that going forward. And then this is another, you look forward several years, and now you have a huge mess that nobody who comes in, probably including yourself, will be able to come in and make sense of when you need to find information in here. So that's why we need to spend time doing this. So I think a lot of times the details are there's just always a calculation of what are the implications of these details. And if it's not important, then it's not important.
Do you track details of stuff you don't consider important?
No.
Okay.
No,
See, I still track. Yeah, I still track. I've noticed I track a lot more unimportant details than intuitives do. What they would consider unimportant, I still track them. Sometimes I consider them important, sometimes I don't consider them important, but I'm still tracking them. There's still something that goes in my database of information for future reference.
Yeah, and important can also mean, if it's important to me, I'll track it, or it can mean two things. That's one, is if it's important to me, and two is if it, I wouldn't say important as much as it has implications. it has implications. There is a certain probability that this will be needed. And if it's not in place, or if it's not in the right order, whatever set of details, these details aren't in order, then we're looking forward to a problem. It's going to take us more time to solve that problem in the future than to get them in order now and going forward. Therefore, it's important now. So those are the kinds of, that goes back to what Kat was talking about earlier about always planning and those kinds of calculations. That's not a conscious thing with extroverted thinking. I think it's just, that's always a calculation that's ongoing, those kinds of things. That's
like more the strategy of the details than actually caring about the details for the details' sake, or this is what I'm hearing you say is like,
yeah, detail for detail's sake is more like perfectionism, right? Which again, that's where for me, it depends on how important it is to me. And that's a personal like value judgment on the thing. In those cases, like if I'm writing something, like I don't want punctuation out of place. I want everything correct. I want, all my things laid out. But that's because it's important to me that, this thing is, that's when I fall into perfectionism, is when something is important to me for some personal reason.
Interesting. Thank you everyone for coming out and talking about the TJ temperament. And it's also great to hear about the level of strategy or systematizing or streamlining that you all have in the ability to get things done, and the ability to maneuver around the resources, maneuver around time to create the best results for the bottom line. It's just this wondrous craft of completing things, giving closure to tasks, finishing tasks, being able to push aside your feelings to get the job done that needs to get done, to make it happen. So it's great how you have the ability to do that. And so thanks, Amy, for coming out and sharing the ESTJ perspective. You have a lot of amazing thoughts around type, and you're able to add a lot of awareness around the ESTJ type, because both the ISTJ and the ESTJ type are underrepresented. So it's great that Samuel and Amy are out here, given your take of the type. So people have a more realistic view of how y'all look like, as opposed to the descriptions online. You give a more three-dimensional human take. Great. And it's nice that your husband, Amy, helps you with the ever improvement of your NE and FI too. So you have extra powered bottom of your function stack from that. That's great. And thanks, Samuel, for coming out. You're so eager to do panels. It makes me so happy that you like to participate. Yay! It's nice to have you on. And you're able to add these interesting perspectives, because you like type so much that you come up with your own ideas around type too. And I can see that as you add these new Samuel remixes of how type is seen. So thank you for that. And thanks, Michael, for always making your way out and always joining these panels. You're our residential INTJ, and it's nice to have you in the spaces. Yeah, and you don't like the compliment section, so yay, Michael, that's it. Okay, bye. And hi, Kat. Thank you so much for joining. I really appreciate you taking time out of your busy ENTJ schedule to schedule time to hang out with us type people. We enjoy your presence. As an Enneagram 3, you have the emanating qualities of success just rippling off your being. So thanks for that. And I appreciate y'all for watching. I'll see you all in the next episode. Bye.